Well, I'm glad you folks are here with us today. We are in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 21 through 33. Sometimes I have a clever story or joke or something, illustration. But today we're just going to pretty much jump right into the text. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and we've been talking in 2 Corinthians. Last week we had Brother Jerry with us. He's up north this week with his wife Joy, so they're okay, but I imagine they'll be back next week. But I have a date for my surgery coming up. I have heart surgery coming up, open heart. I have to have a pacemaker. I have to have a valve replaced. And that's March 19th, so if you'll be praying for that. And part of me is like, I'm getting around pretty good. I don't know why I need this. And then, you talk to the surgeon or a doctor and go, you're not getting around that great and you don't have much time. You might have a year if you don't take care of this. So, good to know. And we'll just pray that the Lord handles that. And, my wife says she notices I'm getting worse some days. So we'll see what happens, right? And as long as God gives me breath, right, we're going to try to do what He has called us to do. So, but I'm glad that you're here and that you want to hear what the Lord has laid on my heart through His Word. So let's just jump right into 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Paul has been talking in really this whole section. You look at 2 Corinthians chapter 9. He talks about this ministry to the saints. So 9 is all about the giving, but we started in 10 with this little series. And in chapter 10, he's talking about the criticism he has endured from the other, from these false apostles that have tried to take over the churches, to drive them, to pull them away from a relationship with Jesus Christ, and to bring them back into Judaism, back into slavery and bondage. And so they're just trying to take that church away from Satan, or away from God, and give it to Satan, And so Paul, and they're going to go after the strongest defender of that church, the strongest supporter of that church, and that's going to be Paul. So they go after Paul, but he has to defend himself now. And these false teachers have all kinds of boasting and big claims of how righteous they are. And so they come at Paul, and they tell the Corinthians, don't listen to that guy. He is weak. He is unimpressive. You can't trust what he says. Look at us. We're healthy. We're wealthy. We're successful. And you guys should really be paying us, compensating us for what we're worth. And, look at that Paul guy. He doesn't even charge you. Well, something's only worth what you'll pay for it. And obviously he doesn't think it's worth anything. Otherwise he wouldn't be not charging you, right, for his ministry there. Well, he had to set the record straight and say, no, this is being paid for by other churches, right? My ministry to you and myself. I am sacrificing my own time, my own effort, my own money to come to you and give you the gospel. Right? And so they've got all these critiques for him, and they've got all these ways to make themselves look good, build themselves up, and their real goal is to get rid of Jesus from that church. They want to and why? Well, because they can make more money and get more pleasure and more glory out of the whole deal that way. So Paul is left at an unusual situation where he has to defend himself. Because he's not just talking about himself anymore, right? And we're taught from Jesus not to be proud, not to boast, not to brag. So what is Paul supposed to do? If they're criticizing him, right, what's he supposed to do? So he says, I've got it. I'll figure out a way to do this. I'm going to boast, but I'm going to humble brag. And that's what he's about to do. He's about to humble brag in this section, okay? And he knows this is crazy, but he has no choice because these Corinthians are being led astray by these hucksters, So in chapter 11, verse 21b, let's start in 20 so you get context. Verse 20 says, "For you tolerate it if anyone enslaves you, if anyone devours you, if anyone takes advantage of you, anyone exalts himself, anyone hits you in the face." Right? You do this well. You just love being taken advantage of, don't you? You tolerate these people, and they're doing all these things to you. And then in 21 he says, "Well, to my shame," this is sarcasm, like, oh, I'm so embarrassed, but guess what, guys? To my shame, I must say, we have been weak by comparison, right? Like we must be like wimps to you guys because we don't punch you in the face. That's what you want, right? And so he's really laying it on. So now in the second part of 21, he says, "But," and this is a whole new section. 21 should be cut in half right there. "But in whatever respect anyone else is bold, with all their boasts, right? I speak in foolishness." Right? I am just as bold myself. Okay? If you want to have a dumb argument contest, let's have a dumb argument contest. Right? That's what he's about to do. I'm talking like an idiot. But guess what? They forced my hand. Are they, verse 22, are they Hebrews? So am I. Right? Right? Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Now, this is going to get to the next level. Are they servants of Christ? Well, I speak as if insane. This is not just foolishness. This is insanity. Right? This is crazy. But I more so. I'm more of a servant of Christ than they are. Now he's really going to turn it on. But how? In far more labors, in far more imprisonment, beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times from the Jews, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys, in dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from such external things, well, there's the daily pressure on me of concern for all the churches. Right? Who is weak without my being weak? Who is led into sin without my intense concern? If I have to boast, I will boast of what pertains to my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, he who is blessed forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the ethnarch under Aretas, the king, was guarding the city of the Damascenes in order to seize me. And I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall, and so escaped his hands. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word. Wow. What a way to brag and boast, right? What a way to fight. Hey, these guys want to claim that they're superior. Guess what? I've been beaten up, right? They think they're so great. Guess what? People have rejected me all over the place. Guess what? I've been in jail a lot. Guess what? I've been without food, without clothing. I've slept out in the stars. Not by choice, not for fun, right? He just goes on, he lays it on. You know, I want to read it kind of more. This is my own little translation. It's not really a translation, but it's just kind of making it more today. As you look at this section here, right, it's almost like he's saying, hey, do you guys want to hear a really stupid argument? Right? Do you guys want to hear a really dumb argument for why you should listen to me and not them? I mean, it's the same argument they're using, so why not, right? Let's use it. It's the same argument that they're using, so here goes. You should listen to me instead of them because all this pedigree stuff, right? They think they're of this superior race. And that's what they did. Jews thought they were superior to everyone, right? The Hebrews thought they were superior to others, to the Gentiles. All this pedigree stuff that they're so proud of, well, I've got that too, right? Oh, and guess what? You know how they keep talking about how they are servants of Christ? We serve Christ. We serve Christ. Well, guess what? This is just stupid to talk this way. This is crazy, but I'm even more of a servant of Christ than they are. If they want to say they're servants of Christ, I'm more of a servant of Christ. No, it's true. Sure, here's how I got to my lofty position, right? I've done way more physical labor for Christ than any of them. And to us, right, we look at that and we go, well, that's how you would brag in the church today, wouldn't you? Right? We would think that. We would go, hey, I've worked harder for this church. I've put more blood, sweat, and tears into this church. And we think today in America that that's boasting. But back then to the Philippines, right, it wasn't boasting. Yeah, the Philippines. To the Philippians, it wasn't boasting. It was like, he's bringing up everything shameful about himself, all his weaknesses, all his deficiencies, right? It'd be like me trying to say, like, you should listen to me because I got a C+ in Hebrew, right? like things I'm not proud of. Like, I had to choose which course to do better in than others, and I chose Hebrew to sacrifice. So that's why you should listen to me, because I had to work really hard, right? It doesn't make sense. Right? And Paul is just going to take things, I've done way more physical labor for Christ than any of them, which is demeaning. I dug more ditches, right? I've been arrested and thrown in jail for Christ way more than any of them. I've been beaten so many times that I've lost count. And many times I almost died for Christ. And then he goes on. He goes on. So what do we learn from this, right? As you look at this passage and this section as a whole, what are some of the takeaways, right? It's a very specific situation. There's enemies of Christ that are sneaking in, looking like servants of Christ to take over the church and eventually pull it away from a relationship. Their new agenda will be, how can we stop people from having a relationship with Jesus Christ, right? And that's the new agenda. Versus the old one with Paul was, how do we get people to have a relationship with Christ, right? So what do we learn from this section? Because it's written for us, but not to us. So there's a very specific situation. What can we learn from it here? We can learn, number one, that boasting is foolish. Boasting is foolish, right? It's foolish to boast. He says it over and over and over again when he has to defend himself, which is very difficult, especially when you're in ministry. People criticize you when you're in ministry. Did you know that? I know it seems and looks like as a pastor you're constantly affirmed and people only say nice things about you, but guess what? It's not true. Sometimes people say mean things about you. They say horrible things about you, and you're like, I'm just trying to preach Jesus. I do not understand why you're attacking me. But we do, right? We do understand. People say mean, horrible things about your wife just because you're the pastor. And they think it's okay. I had a guy tell me once, hey, man, you live in a glass house because you're a pastor, so I should be able to say what I want. Okay, sure, right. Attack my kids, attack my wife, attack me. And that's nothing. That's just words. Paul had fists and slaps and whips. Why do people attack servants of God? Because they don't want to change. They don't want their deeds exposed. They don't want to hear the truth, right? They want to keep people from hearing it. So when you face that criticism, what do? Hey, you're a bad guy. I don't trust you. Satan's also working on this. He's also trying to get people to say things and criticize and derail ministry. How do you handle it? What do you do? Well, I know what you don't do, and that is, no, listen, I am super spiritual, right? No, listen, I've been to seminary. No, listen, I know all the words to the hymns. I know that doesn't work. I know that's not a good idea. You can't go on boasting at their own game, and it's foolish to boast. And Paul says it over and over again. He says in verse 21 there, but in whatever respect anyone else is bold, I speak in foolishness. Right? It's an aside. I am just as bold myself. Right? And then 23, are they servants of Christ? I speak as insane. I more so. Right? This is foolish. This is stupid. But then down in verse 30, if I have to boast, I will boast of what pertains to my weakness. So this is the humble brag. This is where this all comes in. If I have to boast, fine. I'm going to boast in the shameful things. And then really we see in chapter 12, verse 1, he continues this whole thought. He says, boasting is necessary, though it is not profitable. But I will go on to visions and revelations of the Lord. I know a man in Christ. And then he goes on to talk about the time he went up to heaven. Paul had some major positive things on his behalf, but he paid for it. He says in verse 5, on behalf of such a man I will boast, but on my own behalf I will not boast, except in regard to my weaknesses. For I do wish to boast. If I do wish to boast, I will not be foolish, for I will be speaking the truth, but I refrain from this so that no one will credit me with more than he sees in me or hears from me. Right? It's foolish to boast. You shouldn't boast. When your wife calls you a name, right? Your wife says, you know what? Get up and help. You're lazy. You're sitting around. That is not the time, right? Just guys, right? Guys, that's not the time, I speak from experience, to get up and say, you know what? I do a lot around here, and you could do a little bit more around here too, Oh my. That's the foolishness of boasting. Do you see that? Do you see how that works? Now is the time, you know what? Get up. You're never helping me around. I'm sorry. Okay, what can I help you with? That's how you handle it. You don't get up or you don't sit there and go, you know what? I did plenty. When you were out playing, having a girls' day, I was cleaning the house. I don't know, right? We don't boast. Boasting is foolish. You shouldn't boast unless someone is forcing you. And in this case, they were forcing Paul. And we learn also that if you do need to boast, it's better to boast about humble things, not about proud things, about things which you're proud of. To defend yourself with, you're right, I need to change. Yeah. So that's what Paul does. Number 2, second thing we learn from this section is that being a servant of Christ is not a life of luxury. Did you hear that? Being a servant of Christ is not a life of luxury. I know there's smiley pastors out there that are going to tell you the Lord has a wonderful plan for your life. I just want to tell you all, I'm so glad that you're here today, right? And I want you to come and just receive the Lord's blessing. And he's going to pour it out upon you, and you're going to get more and more monetary life and blessing in him. And every day is going to be better than the previous because you're going to get more money and more health and more prosperity. Garbage. You're going to get all that stuff, but not until the resurrection. Not until you die and go to heaven. This life, we're not promised that. We're not promised that. Paul, probably the greatest servant of Jesus Christ that I've ever heard of, right? I don't know about you. Look at his life. We see 4 things from Paul's life, about being a servant of Christ. And he says, I'm more of a servant of Christ because of these things. So what makes you more of a servant of Christ? Hard work, right? Danger, exposure to danger, pain, right? And humiliation. All those things. Hard work, danger, pain, humiliation. That's what being a servant of Christ is all about. To be more of a servant of Christ, you have to be more exposed to hard work, danger, pain, and humiliation. Being a servant of Christ is hard work, it's dangerous, it's painful, and it's humiliating. It really is. And this is what Paul says. Are they servants of Christ? Verse 23, I speak as if insane. I more so. In far more labors, in far more imprisonments, beaten times without number, often in danger of death. 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. Has to be 39 because 40 is the maximum punishment you can be whipped in the Old Testament. And so they'd always take one off in case somebody miscounted. So they do 39. That's why. Right? Don't want to. See, they're even legalistic in beating people. It's just crazy to me. 3 times I was beaten with rods. That must have hurt. Once I was stoned. Somebody whipped stones at him. He almost died from that. They thought he was dead, actually. They left him dead, and then he woke up and walked back into the city. 3 times I was shipwrecked. You ever been on a boat and the water starts coming in? You're like, uh-oh. Turn that bilge pump on, and then you gun it. You go to the shore, and then you get the bucket. You know, I've never had one sink, but I've been like, uh-oh. And this is not like Lake Michigan or the Bay, Saginaw Bay, where it's like, this is out. This is big seas and stuff. And, I can swim for a while, but a night and a day I have spent in the deep. One time my wife and her cousin and I went out, and this is Lake Michigan. Lake Huron and in the bay here, you don't have it as much, but on the west side, there's sandbars. You know what a sandbar is? You can look and you can see a strip of lighter color. It's sand. And you swim out, and it gets kind of above your head, and then you're standing up, and you're like into water like here, and you're like, yeah, this is awesome. So we're going to the second sandbar, because there's kind of, sandbars. So we start swimming out. My wife was a lifeguard at the time for Michigan's Adventure, and I thought I was a pretty good swimmer. And her cousin seemed pretty healthy. So we get out, and we get all the way out, and we're like, man, where is this second sandbar? And we're swimming, and the waves are coming over, and we're swimming. And then we're like, where is the sandbar? And you get tired after swimming. And then all of a sudden, we're like, we went past it. It's not touchable, even though it looks like it. We're like, we got to turn around. Because, you're just swimming just so I can get to that sandbar and stand up and catch my breath. And then you realize, we got to turn around. And you're like, oh, no. And I turned into Dory, right? Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. And it's like, oh, help, help. And we're swimming, and getting pulled back and swimming. And you just put your head down and go, and it's scary. And Lonnie takes off. She's a lifeguard. And I'm like, wait. Finally, her cousin and I, we make it, and we touch the ground, and we're like, oh, right? It's just a little bit of fear out in the water, and, you might drown. Paul spent a night and a day in the deep. He must have had something he was hanging on. I don't think you can swim that long. I don't think you can swim a night and a day, and nobody would make it. So he must have been, hanging on something. You ever been on a cruise? Anybody been on a cruise ship? Yeah? And you look out at night, especially, and you see that water, and you look, and there's no land. That's a little intimidating, right? Paul, imagine your ship goes down, and now you got to just be in it, right? And Paul did that. He went through that. He said, a night and a day I have spent in the deep. By the way, after this was written, he gets to add a 4th shipwreck to it, because that's in the book of Acts. He gets shipwrecked a 4th time, and he has to spend time in that. 26, I've been on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers among the false brethren. I have been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, and hunger and thirst, often without food, and cold and exposure. You ever been too cold? You've had not enough coat or clothes, and you're outside? That's rough. And that's what Paul experienced a lot. Being a servant of Christ is hard work, like the labor that he did. Being a servant of Christ is dangerous, like all the dangers from robbers and Gentiles and countrymen. The guy was never safe, you know. Being a servant of Christ is painful. All the beatings he took. I've been beaten up so many times, right? I've never been beaten up. I don't know what that feels like. He's been locked up. The worst I got for locked up, I was doing jail ministry within the last year, and was in a cell block, and all of a sudden, it's time to go. I did my first Bible study in that cell block, then I came to the other one, did the same Bible study again for a different group. Okay, they're like, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm just trying to get out. I'm the chaplain." "Oh, we can't send anybody to come and get you right now. You're going to have to wait." Now, every other week, you push the button and I get out. This week, "We can't send anybody to get you." So I'm like, okay. So I just had to sit there. I sat there in a chair and I talked to the guys and hung out. We played some chess and sat there. 45 minutes I had to sit there. And finally I bust the buzzer again. I'm like, "Hey, listen, anybody coming to get me?" "Oh, yeah, okay." And then they got me out. So I've been locked up for 45 minutes. That's about it. And it wasn't too bad, honestly. But Paul was locked up all the time for something he did, which was preaching Christ. And honestly, I think those guys did that on purpose, but that's okay. That's all right, right? But being a servant of Christ is dangerous, it's painful, it's humiliating. Paul endured all the humiliation. Look at that last little story, right? It was in Damascus, the ethnarch under Aretas, the king, was guarding the city of the Damascenes in order to seize me. And I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall, and so escaped his hands. He was let down like they let him escape. He must have been small, right? He fit in a basket and they lowered him down to let him out. Well, Paul does mean small, by the way. Yeah. Humiliation. This is not a story that's like, "Guess what I did? And then I told that guy, you listen to me, you punk." Right? Instead, he's like, "I had to get let down in a basket like a little kid." So we know that boasting is foolish. We know that being a servant of Christ is not a life of luxury. And we know that serving Christ is worth it. Being a servant of Christ is worth it. Paul must have thought that, right? And he must have felt that down to his bones, that being a servant of Jesus Christ was worth it, or he would have stopped. You could not beat it out of Paul. Paul would tell people about Jesus. They would catch him in the act. "Hey, stop telling people about Jesus. Don't do it." You know what? And he'd be like, "Well, I got to do what I got to do. I got to tell people about Jesus. And I'm going to tell you about Jesus right now." And they say, "Stop it." And he says, "No." And they say, "Stop it." And he gets beaten, and he stands, "No." And they take rods and they beat him with it. Right? They take a whip, they whip him 39 times. They do that 5 times on 5 separate occasions. "No, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to tell everybody about Jesus. Jesus wants me to do this. I'm going to do it." "Well, we're going to beat you." "Okay, beat me," right? "We're going to stone you. We're going to hit you with rocks." "Okay, throw rocks at me," right? You couldn't beat it out of him. About the time I post a post on Facebook about something and someone goes, "Hey, that's stupid," I'm like, "Oh," right? Like, maybe I better not say that. Like, you couldn't beat it out of Paul. So he thought serving Christ must have been worth it. Why? Well, turn to Philippians. We've been in Philippians in Sunday school in chapter 3, verses 7 through 11. He says, "But whatever things were gained to me, those things I have counted as loss for the sake of Christ. More than that, I count all things to be lost in view of the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them but garbage, rubbish, poop. That's what the word means, right? So that I may gain Christ. I count everything in this life to be dung, to be doo-doo, compared to gaining Jesus Christ. I count all that. And that's why I've suffered the loss of all the other things, because he is so much more valuable. And may be found in him not having a righteousness of my own derived from the law, but that which is through faith in Christ, the righteousness which comes from God on the basis of faith, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his sufferings, being conformed to his death, in order that I may attain to the resurrection from the dead. Right? Christ is worth it, even if you get beat up over and over and over again for telling people about Jesus. Serving Christ is worth it. So what does that mean for us? 3 things. Number one, and we're working backwards through the list here, we must absolutely adore Jesus Christ. Okay? We must absolutely adore Jesus Christ. If we don't, it's because we're not seeing him clearly enough. Right? You realize that. If there's other things in your life that you like more than Jesus, it's because you don't know Jesus well enough. You don't understand him. You don't know him. I don't know him well enough. He is worth it. Paul had a crystal clear picture of him. That's why he could do what he did. It's really hit home for me lately. So my heart, I told you, you've been following along with my situation with my heart and what I have going on. I have a bad aortic valve. I was born that way, right? And it only works at 12% efficiency. Right now, I think it's up to upper 20s, 28 or so. I also, somewhere along the way, I don't know if I was born with it or it came as a result of the heart not working properly, I have a left branch bundle blockage, which means there's an electrical issue with my heart and it doesn't pump like it's supposed to. So blood reroutes and goes around a different chamber. So I need my valve replaced and I need a pacemaker put in. Thankfully, we have the technology and the medications to make that happen. So they're going to cut my chest open on March 19th. They're going to pry my rib cage. Hopefully my ribs don't break. They're going to go in. They're going to replace my old valve with a new valve. I don't know if it's going to be cow or pig or mechanical yet. We're going to talk about those options when I get down there. And then they're going to put wires, leads on my heart, attach them to my heart itself at that nerve, and that pacemaker will fire up. And either my heart will respond and start pumping, or it won't. It's just the way the heart is. If it doesn't, the surgeon, the doctor in Cleveland Clinic said, we can keep you alive, right? He has an accent, right? We can keep you alive with mechanical means, okay? We can keep you alive with mechanical means until you get a new heart, because you're going to need one if your heart doesn't start pumping on its own. So now I'm like, oh my goodness. So imagine, going through that, the emotions I went through going, I'm going to need, probably not, hopefully not, but I might need a new heart, a heart transplant. How do you pray for something like that? That's what I don't want. I really don't want that, because some guy has to die so that I can have his heart. I don't want anybody to die so that I have to have their heart, right? So I go through the first emotions of, well, I might die, but I'll be with God. And I think, well, if somebody else dies and I get their heart, and this is how it goes, what kind of life am I going to have to live? Right? Think about that. Where does your mind go? This is where mine went. I'm going to have to do something amazing with my life to be worthy of that. Even though the guy has already died and I had nothing to do with it, someone else's heart, and they died for me, but not really, but sort of. Right? Like I won't have received someone else's heart just so that I can sit on the couch, watch TV, pick my nose, right? And eat junk food. Hopefully I would eat food before I pick my nose. Right? Like I'll have to do something amazing, something worthy for a sacrifice that big. I know another guy, he had new valves put in from a cadaver, and somebody else's valve, they died. And he said how he got over the guilt. He ran marathons. He biked across the United States of America. He says, that's how I got over that. I did something worthwhile. And I said, well, that's what I'm going to have to do. But here's the thing, right? This has already happened to me. Some other guy sacrificed himself to take my sins away and give me a new heart. Jesus Christ died for my sins. He sacrificed, and he did it voluntarily. Wow. And now I should have that same feeling of gratitude, unworthiness, and wanting to live a life worthy of his sacrifice, even now. I mean, Jesus didn't sacrifice his sinless, righteous life, saving me from an eternal suffering in hell so that I could be selfish, demanding, and demeaning to other people. Right? And he didn't save you for that reason either. He didn't save you from eternal torment so that you could just consume and take up space. Why did he save me? Why did he save you? Why did he sacrifice himself? So that we could produce love and joy and peace and patience and kindness, goodness and faithfulness and self-control, so that we could be kind to others and helpful to others. He saved me so that I could tell others about how special he is. He saved me so that I could serve others and help them find him. And it's worth it. It's worth it. A guy like that, very rarely a person might die for an innocent man, a righteous man. They might, but God demonstrated his own love in this, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Wow. And that leads us to the second point here. The first one is we must absolutely adore Jesus Christ. The second point is we must serve Christ no matter the cost. We must serve Christ no matter the cost. He is worth it, right? So whatever it costs, no matter what, even if it costs us our lives, we have to serve Christ. And then number 3, the last point, we must shun pride in our own lives. Shun pride in our own lives. What does that look like? What does that feel like, right? You know what it is to be proud, to think you deserve better, you deserve more from the people in your life. We've got to shun that pride. We've got to shun that pride and stay away from it.